Hello makers and droid builders. Once again, my name is Jason and this is the Droid Garage, and this build is being brought to us by Acidity and their Flash PLA Plus filament. If you recall, we had an incident with the hip area of the SE-2 droid we're building. We now have a completed hip. So in today's video, we're going to watch a couple segments and see how we fixed it. Before we do so, let's take a look at the completed area here. If we look at, I don't remember what side it was now. It was this side. Now, I'm going to get a little nitpicky. This seam line is driving me bananas, and I thought for sure that it was resolved. So, another build I'm working on, the BD droid, I did a neck piece, and if you could take a look, I used a wood burner and melted the pieces together, and it's the first time, so, but this, it's not a line, it's more of just divots, and it'll fill with the Bondo, but this is going to be my new default way of doing these seams. So I'm going to figure out a way to sand this down and strip off that paint, and in a future video we're going to watch me melt some plastic together. But for today, however, let's take a look at the process of fixing that broken hip piece, and in the month following we will take a look at putting the legs together. Stay tuned. Hey droid builders, if you recall, we have this hip piece where I had the filament run out mid-print, so we went from blue to black, and even after printing it didn't adhere very well and the two pieces separated. I have since used Gorilla Glue and Super Glue in certain spots, and then I used UV resin to really hold the pieces together, and I started sanding it down once to kind of see if it was going to be worth salvaging, and then realized that I was going to do this on video. So here we are. I brought it back in. I have my bottle of UV resin and my UV flashlight and my brush, and all I'm going to do, and if we could look at the good one, we can see that it's just one smooth spot, so all the way around. And because this is the hip and it isn't going to have much visibility, it's going to go like that. The legs will come down. I don't think it's going to be very much of an eyesore. And I'd like to kind of use these moments as practice. Let's see if I can fix it. And if I can't, we could always reprint it. This is in a good spot. So let's have at it. I am kind of looking at an angle, which I know isn't going to you guys don't have the view I do. So if you can't notice, I'm basically looking at this at an angle and just trying to fill it in as best as I can. And I like doing it with the UV resin first because it has a strong hold and will bond the two pieces together well. And it is also less expensive than the Bondo. When it comes to sanding it, sanding with the Bondo is easier than sanding this UV resin. Once it cures hard. We will use a low grit sandpaper. I will probably use a 120 to start with to kind of nip these areas down. And if you've never worked with UV resin before, at least with this brand I've noticed, and I'm pretty sure this is a common issue, even after curing, it can be a little tacky, the area. Don't be alarmed. Keep some rubbing alcohol nearby, and you can just put some on a cotton swab or a paper towel and just wipe it off that way. You could sprinkle it with talcum powder, baby powder. I have done both of those. And let me see if I can, so if you can look, at just the first pass, not too bad. I'm happy with that. And there we can see it's starting to break up a bit. So now let's go back and hit those areas. And this is the back of it. So this is really the part that we should be most concerned with is the front. And it doesn't look too bad. I apologize if this isn't translating to video well, guys. Okay. And for a second I thought I maybe used too much, but it doesn't look like it. It doesn't take much for it to set. When I first started using UV resin, I did have an instance where it was tacky, and I became alarmed and thought I'd put it out in the sun for a few minutes and ended up with a warped droid head. Let me get a blob there, but that's all right. Yeah, this is looking pretty good, honestly. I didn't expect it to go quite this well. Let's see. Also give it a moment or two to settle and fill in the gapped area. Remember, it's a liquid, even though it's kind of gel-ish. So allow it to seep in and fill up those areas. Yeah, not too bad. I'll hit this area in the back, and then we will take it out to the garage, hit it with the palm sander, and then I think we will be good. This is ugly. So you can tell it's definitely not on there proper, but if you look at this area, that's the only place you're going to notice, and it's going to be in the back, and I'm not worried about it. I have to hit that one again. Yeah, if you can tell, that spot's not the best. That's the area in the back. Yeah, I'm not that worried about it, guys. I think I'm going to run this out into the garage. Sand down these areas a little bit and see where that leaves us. And I'll be honest with you, I am not going to set up and record out there either. I hope you didn't want to watch me do it. So let me go sand this down and see where we're at, and we'll know how much attention we need to pay it when we get back. All right, so I'm back after sanding, and honestly, it turned out much better than I thought it would. So I'm not going to do a whole lot extra to it. There are spots here and here where you can kind of see I went a little heavy and ended up messing it up. So it's hard with the lighting. Let me see. Yeah, there he is, better. Anyway, I'll end up probably gluing that down and covering it with Bondo, and then I'll fill this area in here a little bit more. But if you look at this angle here, honestly, I didn't do too bad of a job. And the little waves that are there aren't going to be that noticeable once the droid's put together. And I stopped sooner than I intended to because I figured this is an outside part as well as this guy. And then we have this center guy here, and they're going to be joined in. So I figured before I start getting too detailed on the rest of this, I'm going to go ahead and print out the dowels and join these together and just treat these hips as one piece, solid piece. And I'm not quite sure, like the leg goes in there, so considering this is one complete circle, it'll be easy enough to, the paint, it'll be different enough that this is what we're going to want to do this separate than the actual leg piece anyway. So I'm pretty happy about that. So I'm going to print out some dowels, and then when I get finished, I will pick this back up. We will join the three parts of the hip together and get this finished up. Stay tuned. Hey, here we go, more with the hip. So here is the botched one, as you can tell from the blue and the black. And there are 6 dowels in each side, 1 and then 2 and 2 in the back. So what I've done is I've glued the 2 side hip pieces to the center, and I used Gorilla Glue. And then what I usually do, and what I did this time actually, is I put a few dabs of UV resin to hold it in place. And now what I'm doing is I'm going in and filling in these gap areas. And if you could see, it's going to take a minute. And I'm doing it in small batches, just filling it in, brushing it with a paintbrush, and then using a UV black light flashlight to cure it. And sanding the resin is much more difficult than sanding the Bondo. So I don't necessarily go for a flush. I'm okay leaving it a little bit indented and then filling in the remainder with Bondo. And that's what I'm working on now. Another thing I'm doing, some of these bottom pieces where the print came out, where it's thick and more difficult to sand, I'm filling in and brushing some resin in there as well. And it'll be just a little bit easier just to knock the top part of the fill of the resin off to smooth it out. So that's where we're at. I'm going to stop here, fill in these areas with the UV resin, and then I will come back and we will wrap up the hips. Stay tuned. All right, so I got about 1.5 to 2 hours of work into this, And if we're looking closely, we can see that most of those gaps have been filled. Other areas of note, the gaps that were in here, I used masking tape to get those filled in. And I'm going to take this out into the garage and start some sanding. I did want to point out, so this is our trouble side. And if you remember, this is that area where those two pieces where I sanded too heavy and they pulled up. I cut those out and did two coats of resin and filled it in there. And now I'm going to smooth that out when we take it out in the garage also. The back, if we remember, this is the painful side. I did my best to level it out just by applying resin and letting it set. And it's not going to be perfect, but by the time we sand it and paint it, it's not going to be that noticeable. Plus, it's on the back. It's on the back side, so I'm not that concerned at all. Same with an area at the bottom. Where can I find it? Oh, this guy here. Like, there's a pretty decent gap in there. There, you can see it now. And again, it's only noticeable on the bottom, so I'm not that worried about it. So here we go. Here's our hips. I'm going to take this out in the garage, do a first lap of sanding on it, try to get some of these areas smoothed out, and then we'll bring it back in and go back to our Bondo acetone process and fill in any more recessed areas. There we go. Stay tuned. Okay, back inside after our first run of sanding, I used a 120 grit, and then on parts where I had the resin a little too thick and heavy, I used an 80 grit that has been, I keep a box of pre-used sandpaper, so it was 80 grit without as much bite to it, and I used that to kind of smooth out some of the rougher areas. But other than that, it was a 120. I'm pretty happy with the results. So my next step is going to be using the Bondo acetone mix. You can see where it's shiny are the areas that are recessed that didn't get hit. But if we look at it at an angle, again, still, it's bottom of the Droid. It's not going to make that big of a difference. I'm pretty happy with it. Areas to point out, there was a crack here, so I filled it up with some resin. I'll put a little bit more in there just to kind of make sure it's solid. Here's one of our gapped areas. Here's the problem one. Not too bad. It bulges out a little bit right here. That's not going to be fixable without really grinding into the plastic, and honestly, it's not going to be that big of a difference. Once we get the body in there, nobody's really going to notice. This back piece here is actually looking better than what I was anticipating it would. I'll be able to mostly smooth that out, I think. Again, it's on the back, not that it's going to be that noticeable. And yeah. I'm pretty happy. Again, you can see where the resin was enough, and then in these little gapped areas where it's not, and I'll just dump some Bondo in there. So there we go. Yeah, Bondo acetone next, and then another round of sanding, and then we'll hit it with the filler primer, and then wet sand, and then this is going to be done, and we will be ready to attach the legs. Stay tuned. Okay, we are back after sanding off the Bondo, and pretty satisfied with the results. What I'm looking for now are areas where you can tell it needs another coat, and there's a difference in color. And if we look on the back, same thing here. I added filler to the area in the center where it was warped. I'm trying to sand that out smoothly, and it's coming along much better than I anticipated. And regarding our chipped area, it's coming along well. So again, I'm going to pay attention to the area that's discolored. That's a way to notice that it has not been sanded and therefore needs to be filled a little bit more. But overall, if we just look at it at an angle, I think it looks pretty good. And on the bright side of things, all this in here, since we do have the abdomen printed, it will fill in all of that. So the inside stuff I am not going to worry about at all. So there we are. Next step, I'm going to go ahead and add some more Bondo acetone into the shallow areas, and then some straight up Bondo into these thicker parts. Take it out, sand it one last time, and then we should be good to add some primer to see what really needs some attention. Stay tuned. Okay, here we are back after another sanding, and if we look, I'm pretty satisfied with the results. And right now there's so much. Well, here we go. Here's some markings here. You can see those are discolored, and here's that area that I sanded too heavy. Nope, that's it. But there's so much going on right now with the Bondo that I think it's okay right now to go ahead and hit it with the filler primer and get it one solid color, and we'll be able to see the mistakes better from that point, if they're going to need any additional Bondo or not. I don't think that it's going to. Even the few little areas of discoloration or the marks might be past as dense even. Have to wait and see. And regarding the back, there is, it turned out pretty well. So next up, we're going to hit it with the filler primer and see if it needs any additional Bondo after that.
Here's the story.
And we are back after some priming and sanding. I'm mostly happy. I'm definitely tired of working on this piece, but that happens frequently, you'll see. As I was sanding, first of all, I'm pretty happy with how this fixed area is coming down. I mean, it's pretty much perfect. I mean, and there's our little, well, yeah, the ding from over sanding it, which is now just a little nick, which honestly, there's a little more work I want to do on it, so I'm just going to fill that too. Might as well. And I'll show you what I'm concerned about. So this is the front view, and I don't like this gap in here. I think that will annoy me. It's this side's flush, which is weird because this is the one that misprinted. But at any rate, so I'm going to throw some Bondo in here and then let that dry, and then just get our rounded file and hit that in there and take it out. And actually, I'll probably try to do a time lapse of that. I'll film that so that we can see if I mess it up or not. And then the other thing that is kind of bothering me, first of all, let's look at the back. Our area that was really nicked up came out really well, I believe. But since I'm going to be busting out the Bondo and filling it in there, I am going to go ahead and just add a little bit more into the center there and smooth that out. And I believe those were the only 3 areas that were troublesome to me. Oh, now that I see in the light, that doesn't look too good, so I'll toss a little acetone Bondo mix in there as well and smooth that out now that I see it. But overall, I'm pretty happy. And these areas came out well on the sides. Used some sanding sticks to reach inside there. There we go. So next step, Bondo this area and the other little troublesome areas, and we will call the pelvis a wrap. So stay tuned. I'm going to go ahead and fill this in, and as a reminder, I'm not going to bother with the inside at all since that abdomen sits in there. We won't see any of the mess inside here anyway. This little area here, I had a struggle about filling in a little bit more, and actually I might, since I'm going to have the Bondo out anyway. Oh, that's it. This back piece here. if we look, there's a good angle. Yeah, that, I'm not happy there. So I'm going to slap some Bondo inside of there and try to flatten that out a little bit more. And that's it. So hang tight. We'll be back in a second. I am back from sanding and am calling this monstrosity finished for right now. It is becoming difficult to actually see what needs fixed and what doesn't, especially with the resin. When there's damage that's fixed and the resin is over it, you can see through the resin, and it kind of messes with my perspective a little bit. But other than that, I think everything looks pretty good. That little area back there, again, it's on the back. We have our little mess up on the bottom somewhere. Oh, there it is, which became smaller and smaller as we did passes. So the next thing I'm going to do is throw a coat of regular primer on it, which will help bring out any flaws that I overlooked. And if we see any, we will fix those. And if not, it'll be ready for painting. Stay tuned.